come to my attention that there's some discussions going around about striking in the UFC, and it's kind of a topic everyone likes to talk about, who's the best striker, who's the most technical, everything like that. And I basically thought I might as well give my 2 cents on who I think the best overall strikers are in the UFC is. Just to kind of pave the way, I'm going to lay a few ground rules and why I'm ranking some of these. Because I see a lot of people just throwing up, oh, these are just objectively the best strikers without no real pointing system, we'll say, Cough, cough. Bedtime MMA, calling you out. Yeah, that's right. Not putting Max Holloway in there. Pff, crime. Anyways, so at first, I'm going to say they have to be active. And what do I mean by active? 2-year minimum requirement. So if you haven't fought in 2 years, you're gone. You're out. No ranking for you, okay? That's how I'm doing this. Personally, I just think you have to be active to be ranked anyways. And I think inactivity of 2 years or more should be a D ranking, or you just go down in rankings sort of thing. So for my list, you have to be active within 2 years. Moving on, we have 3 types of strikers that I'll be ranking, and that's kind of how I classify it. You might classify a little bit more. Maybe you say there's, let's say, like 6 classes of striking, whatever. But for the most part, I think a general rule of thumb is that there's the powerful technical strikers. So typically, I'm talking you have to be able to knock out people consistently, and then you also have to look technical while doing it. So it has to look clean, or not necessarily clean, but it has to have, like, the counters look good. Like, it has to look good on display, while also having the power to back it up. Moving on to the next one, there's the volume and clean fighters. So fighters who will almost always out-volume their opponents, and while they're doing it, they're looking pretty clean. Maybe not every shot is a knockout, they're not that powerful, but they're able to get the job done via just smothering you with enough strikes to make you quit. And then we have the dangerous and the fighters that are game. So typically, a lot of weaknesses, and the volume fighters or the powerful fighters are the game fighters. Maybe they get a little dirty, maybe they look a little sloppy, but they get the job done. And they typically get it done either by a finish or by making the other opponent play their game, so to speak. So if you kind of want like an example, I think the powerful technical strikers, great example. Sean O'Malley, obviously. Great power, great technique. The volume and clean fighters, great example. Max Holloway, obviously. He's got many volume and he's pretty clean. I'm not putting Holloway in the powerful category just because, yes, he put away Gaethje and he's put away the Korean Zombie recently, but it's not really the crazy power that Max Holloway's known for. He's just known to smother you in volume. And with the volume thing, it deteriorates the chin mid-fight. So, like, you're kind of chipping away at that chin, but Max just has enough volume to really, like, break your chin. And then dangerous and game. I'm referring to more, what's a good example? Like the Nate Diaz approach, or like a Neil Magny, or what's another good one? Good, like the Dustin Poiriers, where they kind of want to make you play their game. Where they're against the cage, and they just start fucking throwing heat, and hoping that you kind of accompany them in that heat. Also, I'm going to say, the more fights a fighter has, I kind of rate that more. So if a fighter just has 6 or 7 fights in the UFC, I'm not going to rate that as high as the guy who has 15 or 20 fights in the UFC. I just think it's more impressive to be consistently in the UFC and have a cleaner record in the UFC. Higher weight classes, also I'm giving a little bit more points, only because it's my personal belief that the higher weight classes determines, mostly the your placement, pretty much. Like, if you're in 185er, you most likely beat a lot of 170ers in your class of fighting. So if you're great at jiu-jitsu and you're a 185er, it's my belief that you'll probably mop the floor with a lot of 170 grapplers. You know what I mean? Like, I think Roman Dolidze probably clears 170 in terms of a just grappling match. You know what I mean? And that's Roman Dolidze. Just saying. I think weight comes into the factor. But I'm going to give them a little bit extra points just because in the higher weight classes, it obviously implies if you're the better striker, you're probably beating the people below you. But with that being said, let's get right into the rank. So this might surprise a lot of you. I'm putting Dan the Hangman Hooker in number 10. And no, not because of recency bias. I honestly think Dan Hooker is one of the most underrated strikers in the UFC. The best part about Dan Hooker is that he's got pretty good power, he's pretty technical, and he's really game. So he kind of overlaps a lot of these categories. His volume is also decent, and he just seems to be able to break a lot of not ready fighters. He's one of the best gatekeepers you can have because he will determine if a fighter has a good chin and if a fighter is breakable, pretty much. You know, like we look back at his losses, losing to Arnold Allen isn't saying much. This is also, you know, 145, a little different. But when he lost to Arnold Allen, he broke his hand, whatever, right? But this would have been a good matchup to see regardless because Arnold Allen has been proven and he's top 5 material, no question asked. Islam Makhachev, it's fucking Islam Makhachev, you know what I mean? If it was just a striking match, I would probably give it to Dan Hooker. But Islam's pretty decent. He gets the submission. His really only striking losses are to guys like Dustin Poirier, Edson Barbosa, which Edson Barbosa at this time was a different Edson. I believe this was 145 as well. Could be wrong. His natural weight class is 155. So I'm kind of taking that into consideration. He drains himself down and he's still fighting like legends in the striking category. Losing to Dustin Poirier doesn't mean much, and this fight was very close, and Dustin Poirier, of course, has been proven that he has game, he has power, he has, you know, a chin, a little bit, you know, it's kind of fading, but this was, of course, like 4 years ago, a little bit of a different story, and Michael Chandler is a little bit, this one's a little iffy. This is the only one that kind of blemishes his whole, like, gatekeeping idea. I don't think Michael Chandler's that game anymore. I think Michael Chandler's pretty breakable. But, again, this was 3 years ago. I believe this was Chandler's debut. This was around when Chandler just started. So, you know, it's like Chandler kind of just got thrown at him because Chandler was a name from the organization he came from. But yeah, that's pretty much why I'm putting him here. I think he deserves a 10th spot. I think he is one of the top 10 strikers. He's always game. He's always a tough test. And I think a lot of people sleep on Dan Hooker just because maybe he trains with Israel Adesanya, and we all know Israel Adesanya's shit. Or maybe it's because he just has some of these, you know, 2-loss streak, then a win, 2-loss streak, then a win. And the wins are typically not that great. But the wins are always, like, he's supposed to beat those guys, you know what I mean, as a good gatekeeper should. And he's also 34, he's a little bit past his prime. No, he's coming off an injury and stuff like that, but I think it's very impressive to beat a guy like Gamrot and Jalen Turner, which is just like, Jalen Turner is a dangerous striker. He's not a great fighter, and he's easy to break, and that's exactly what he showcased. So, Dan Hooker, great fighter in my opinion. I think he deserves a top 10 spot. I think the top 10 category is very contested at this 10th spot. I just think Dan Hooker is just slightly more proven than a lot of top 10 fighters. Now, moving on to the 9th spot. Now, maybe you think I'm stupid for putting Robert the Grim Reaper Whittaker, or the Reaper Whittaker here, but I think Robert Whittaker deserves a 9th spot because he's never been a champion, to be fair, and he's in those higher weight classes, but my main issue with Robert Whittaker is that he's kind of always chinny in a fight, and I think that's a really big red flag. A lot of the people, let me just double check. Okay, I guess it's not going to be true for everyone on this list, but he's not able to beat certain styles. It seems like Robert is really good at beating anyone who doesn't have power, essentially. And the moment you have any sort of spark in your punch, you could probably put him away, you know? But he's always a dangerous matchup to every striker. You know, against a Sean Strickland, I honestly think that fight is going to be pretty fucking close. And it's one of those fights that you question if Strickland makes it the distance, even though Strickland has a much better chin than people think. But yeah, he's got a great record, and he's been around for a long time. And I think his striking is kind of undeniable because he did kind of outclass Paulo and made Paulo look like he didn't really belong after round 1. And then he was able to absolutely dismantle Ikram, which was clearly, Ikram was supposed to be the next guy. And the UFC wanted that. The only people he really loses to is Adrikas Duplessis, a guy with power, or an Israel Adesanya, a guy with power. But he, for the most part, absolutely dismantles everyone. You'll see this loss here. This is literally 10 years ago. I don't... Like, fighters who had fights 10 years ago don't count. I just respect it that he's learned most of his UFC fights in... he's learned most of his skill in the UFC. So I think that puts him at number 9. I think he's really good. I think he's really dangerous. I just think he's kind of coming to the point where modern day strikers, I think, are going to be able to put it on him. And I think we're going to see a cracking of the chin and maybe like a 3-loss streak retirement from Whittaker in the future. Just my prediction. Maybe not his next fight or whatever, but he is getting up there. 33, just past his prime. Getting kind of concerned, you know, and the 7 losses don't really help that. Of course, it's just it's pretty much just Israel that's the problem when it comes to Robert, but he definitely struggles with power punchers. But moving on, we have Alexander Volkanovski at 8. Now, you might disagree with this. Maybe you disagree the fact that I put Alexander Volkanovski up this high, but my reasoning is because he's kind of the shorter opponent in almost every single fight, and I think he's kind of mastered the idea of being sort of the underdog in terms of having the shorter stature and maybe not the most experience. If you don't know, former rugby player, he went into MMA at a late age and he was able to become champion. He had, I think it was 5 or 6 title defenses. I think it was 5. And then, of course, he tried going up. He wasn't able to make a successful going up. But some actually say he won this. And this first Islam fight, if we're ranking it based off just striking, I think Alex, no doubt, beats Islam in terms of the straight striking. Then he beats Yair. Yair at the time had the aura of being a strong striker. Now it's a little different. He's a little weak, frail boy. But I think what makes Alex stand out as a really good striker, in my opinion, and why I think he's top 8, is because he's the perfect example of a smart striker. He might not have the greatest power. He might not have the greatest technique in terms of, like, you know, being able to mix up everything. You know, he's not always throwing head kicks. He's not throwing, like, mix-up to the bodies and stuff like that very well. He's very good at, like, landing to the head, and he's very good at low kicks. But I think the main problem, or the main reason why I give Alex number 8 is because he always knows what to do when it comes to striking. Against Max Holloway, I don't think he wins every single striking exchange all the time, but I think it's almost like a 45-55. He's just able, 55 being Max Holloway, you know. And I think Volkanovski gets by kind of mixing in the takedowns and mixing in the kicks. And that's why he's just smart. Like, he knows, okay, if I need to kick this opponent, I'm going to kick the opponent. If I need to strike with this opponent, I'm going to strike with this opponent, you know. The only exception, obviously, being Ilia Topuria knocking him out. This is a little bit of a blemish here, and that's pretty much why he's sent down so far. You know, the Volkanovski head kick, 10-day short notice. I don't really rate this too high in terms of, you know, striking prowess or like a degradation on your striking. Yes, he did get knocked out, and it was via head kick, but it's a little different when you're going against straight grapplers who have really good striking. So basically, like, a perfect all-around fighter. And so, like, Ilya did knock him out, and you'll see higher up here why Volk is down here so low. But yeah, I do think Volkanovski deserves a spot in the top 10 for sure, and I just put him at number 8 because I think he He's really smart at knowing, okay, I put my foot here so he can't get up, and I'm going to finish him via punches. Okay, I'm not going to win every single stand-up obligation here, so we're going to start, chopping at the legs with low kicks. That's kind of just how I see it. He's really smart. He's not necessarily, he's a little bit of that all-arounder. Doesn't have the most power, isn't the most technical, doesn't have the greatest game ability, and I think Ilya kind of made Volkanovski play his game, but he's just barely above average in every category, and that's kind of why I put him here. He's a great all-arounder, even in his striking, and I think he's always kind of in the disadvantage areas when it comes to, he fights taller opponents with similar reach, that sort of thing. But other than that, also, he has the least amount of experience out of most people, being an older fighter, and also being a guy who went into MMA much later in his career. Moving on to number 7, Ilya Topuria. So, Ilya's just here for, he's only number 7 for a few reasons. Reason number 1 is I don't think he's been around long enough to be like, okay, this is a killer striker. Reason number 2 is that he got dropped pretty badly by Jai Herbert. And Jai Herbert is shit, okay? Jai Herbert is really, really bad. Unranked fighter. Pretty sure right now he's unranked. And being dropped by an unranked fighter only 2 years ago is a little bit of a red flag to me. Dropped the way he was. Basically, he got dropped to a point where a ref could have stopped the fight, but they didn't. And they just continued. Like a Jalen Turner situation, where it's like the ref could stop the fight, and I'm not agreeing that a ref should have stopped the fight at that point, but it's one of those, like, you can't get dropped like that and, like, expect to just keep going, you know what I mean? And that was only 2 years ago. That's kind of, like, the main concern I have here, and why he gets chopped down a little bit on the rankings. Also, lack of experience. Yeah, he's been around for 4 years now, but it's kind of, like, not that long in comparison to a lot of fighters. And yes, he is powerful, and yes, he does have a great all-around-ish game, but he's mainly a boxer, with a little bit of kicks here and there, with Volkanovski. I do think Ilya Topuria can skyrocket on this list, no problem. Just right now, he's a little bit more of an unproven, flawless fighter, which it's always one of those, like, speculations. Like, I think it would be very hard from the Ilya we've seen, and I know this Jai Herbert was up in weight class again, I know, but I think it's very, very concerning to think about an Ilya Topuria moving up to fight like a Dustin Poirier, or like even a Dan Hooker, I think might be able to provide a lot of issues for Ilya, young, he's average height, for men. So he does have potential, and he's kind of just like a seed that's planted, and he could end up having like this really long resume. But for the moment, I just think he's slightly better than Volkanovski, obviously because he knocked him out. I know styles make fights, and that's some of the reasons why there's certain people ranked a little higher on this list. But Ilya, I do think, is a clean striker. I do think he's clean and I do think he's technical and powerful. He showcased that with Josh Emmett. He wasn't able to put Josh Emmett away, but for 5 straight rounds, he beat the living shit out of him. The Bryce Mitchell, he got the better of the striking exchanges. It's just this Jai Herbert that really hurts to see, personally. But other than that, I do think, Ilya's pretty good. I don't hate on the guy. Maybe you think he deserves a higher spot because of him knocking out one of the greatest of all time. But personally, for me, I think his striking is fairly good. I just think it's fairly unproven. He hasn't been around long enough, and that's why he's sitting at number 7. Moving on. So this might be no surprise, but moving on to number 6, right? Yeah, 6. Islam Makhachev. Now, Islam is a perfect example of a great all-around fighter in terms of he's got the grappling, he's got the striking, he's got the technique. The only thing with Islam is that he doesn't have the greatest chin. And that's kind of why I'm not ranking him higher than 6. Personally, I can't put someone higher than 6. Let me just make sure I'm, okay. Okay, I can't put someone higher than 6 when he's been almost unproven in the striking in terms of masterclassing people. He's never really masterclassed someone in the striking. He's just really good at mixing in his striking with the takedown threats. So that's why he gets put up here. Now, you might disagree and say that Islam doesn't belong in the top 10 striking. I think he does, simply because he's put on great performances against a Dustin Poirier, where it was 2-2 going into the 5th, and he needed to do something about that. He did put a great performance against Alexander Volkanovski too, and he put in a great performance against Charles Oliveira. Now, a lot of these fights have big issues, you know? Charles Oliveira, he did something stupid, got knocked down. Charles Oliveira doesn't have a great chin, right? And a lot of these are finishes by submission, not by TKO. He actually has 5 TKOs, but he has knocked out, like, pretty decent strikers. You know, Bobby Green I consider to be a decent striker. Again, it's chinny. Charles Oliveira, same thing. Volkanovski won. I still think that Islam won that fight. And I think his striking was also on par with Alexander Volkanovski. That's kind of why I put Volkanovski just slightly below Islam on this ranking. Just because I do think he was outstruck. And I think that led to him getting knocked out as well. But it was very close. I think it's one of those, you know, 55-45 situations where it's just, I think Islam is just slightly of that edge better than Alexander Volkanovski. And I think it's almost undeniable. Now, if you take away Islam's grappling, now we start talking, he might be shit. He might get chinned in his next fight. But because he does have that threat of grappling, he's got a nice aura going in, and he's able to really kind of make you play his game. You know what I mean? Which is pretty much, you have to strike with me until I shoot a takedown. And in those striking exchanges, he knows when you're scared of his striking. You know? But the Dustin Poirier fight was pretty close. Dustin Poirier ranked pretty highly. He would be a top 10 contender. Especially because he hasn't won a belt or anything. But that's pretty much where I put Islam. This might be probably the most controversial one that I can think of, just because Islam isn't really known for striking, but I do think it's underrated. I don't like just pure grapplers, and I think out of just pure grapplers, Islam's got probably the best striking out of all of them. Moving on to Peter No Mercy Yan at number 5. Now, you might disagree with this ranking just because he's been on a little bit of a slide, but my argument for why Peter Yan is still one of the best strikers in the UFC, top 5 even, is only because he doesn't lose striking exchanges unless it's Sean O'Malley. Now, I know you can say the Aljamain Sterling fight, Aljo got the better of him. I think Aljo still won that fight purely because he had grappling and not because he had striking. And if you want to say Aljo had better striking, I just disagree fundamentally. But I do think it was a, you know, he beats a Corey Sandhagen, which at the time, this is prime Corey, 3 years ago. Corey Sandhagen was, you know, a monster around this time. Losing to Aljamain Sterling via the legal knee is just a show of bad IQ. But he clearly fixed it. And by clearly fixed it, I mean, not necessarily he went on a 3-fight skid, but he just decided not to do any illegal moves, pretty much. But when we talk about just pure striking, he kind of hasn't lost a striking match other than Sean O'Malley. Now, he did lose to Merab. Merab attempted 60 fucking takedowns on him. I mean, there's not really much striking you can do when someone's hugging your nuts 60 times, you know, when they're on EPO. Just saying. And then he beat Song Yudong. I rate Song Yudong pretty highly. Maybe not like top 10, top 15 potential, but I would probably, I'd rate Song Yudong pretty high, you know? And he kind of outstruck Song Yudong pretty decisively. And yeah, I think if it was a striking match, he beats the fuck out of Merab, and he beats the fuck out of Aljo, you know? And, you know, he's beaten people, like, people forget, man, he beat people like Jose Aldo, Uriah Faber, which, you know, Uriah Faber's Uriah Faber, but he's beat a lot of, like, really solid strikers, And he almost never loses a striking match unless it's Sean O'Malley, you know, and we'll see where he is, you know, a little teaser, I guess, for the rest of the rankings. But I think it's disrespectful to put Peter Yan anything less than number 5, only because, yes, while he has lost fights, he almost always loses to a grappler, you know, with, like, Islam, I'm predicting that he will get chinned eventually. He will definitely 100% get chinned, you know? Peter Yan has the power a little bit. He has the technique. He looks clean. He has decent volume. You know, he's got these nice category, you know, levels to him. Where, like, someone like Islam, I'm predicting that he gets knocked out. A guy like Ilya, he's just unproven, and I think it's possible you can knock him out, especially if you go up in a weight class. Alexander Volkanovski, he just lacks those top levels in terms of all of his stats, you know what I mean, in game speak. And Robert Whittaker just seems to not be able to handle other other powerful strikers, I'll say. Thing with Peter Yan, he's able to handle powerful strikers. He's just not able to handle people who are next to perfect with their striking, and that's Sean O'Malley, you know? He struggles with the people who have EPO and they grapple an insane amount, but that's pretty much it there. But yeah, that's why Peter Yan's my number 5. I just think he doesn't lose in the striking unless there's one person. Again, all of these aren't like, this is a top 10 forever. This is just a top 10 for now, pretty much, right now as we stand in 2024, August 22nd. Alright, moving on. Number 4. Have you ever been fingered by a fighter? Good old Tom Aspinall. Now, I know what you might say, and this might be the first thing people say. He's not experienced enough to be ranked in the top 10. He's only been around for, what would it be, 4 years? Yeah, 4 years and some change. Why are you putting Tom Aspinall at number 4? The reason why I think Tom Aspinall deserves number 4, his loss is due to an injury, like his knee pulling out. It literally doesn't even count. You remove this, he's a flawless fighter, in the UFC, okay? But outside of the flawless fighter, he has finished everyone in the first round. And not only the first round, the first minute, or the first few minutes. And the only other person to do that was Sergey Pavlovich. He stepped up on short notice and knocked out Sergey Pavlovich, a giant scary Russian. So I'm just going to be honest personally, I think it's one of the most impressive resumes ever on UFC heavyweight in history, being able to knock out all of your opponents within the first round, and to be able to make John Jones run away like a little bitch. Just saying, John Jones, you know, if there were 2 men in a room, I'm picking this guy over you, just saying. But I do think his aura is definitely there. But I think the main reason, not only is he powerful to knock out other heavyweights in round 1, because I know the argument is, well, heavyweights don't have great chins anyways. Fair enough. But if you want to say that, okay, his power doesn't count or whatever, he still looks technical when he's in there. He's not going in there and just jabbing and knocking out everyone. He's going in there, fucking using his head movement to dodge these punches. Or maybe he'll get hit and he'll look completely fine at heavyweight, which is rare. And then he just comes back and knocks you out right after you've landed. It's like, he is a perfect definition of what a heavyweight should be. Not only is he an all-around fighter on the ground, but he's also a technical striker that has power and is smart. He almost covers every single basis. The only thing we haven't seen yet is game. And that's pretty much why he sits at number 4. Because his game is untested in terms of, you know, a dirty cage scrap, or, you know, what happens when he fights someone like a John Jones, where John Jones will just sit there and, you know, fucking illegal oblique kick and illegal eye poke and illegal grab the fence, shit like that. Basically, when he's fighting against the whole fighting organization as a whole, we haven't seen him do that yet. But outside of that, he's stood up to every test. Curtis Blades, great wrestler, and he knocked his ass out. Sergey Pavlovich, great boxer, knocked his ass out. Marcin Tybura, great grappler, knocked his ass out. I know that's aged a little iffy now. Volkov, about to fucking rematch because Volkov has been on a fucking tear. Because Volkov is a great technical strong striker and a fairly decent grappler. And yeah, it's just, I know he hasn't been around for long, but his resume is just very, very impressive, and he's got one of the best records for a heavyweight, in my opinion, that you could ever have, while also being a badass and defending his interim belt. He's just a straight up G. He's a dangerous striker. He's an overall great fighter. That's why I put him at 4. Maybe you disagree, but I think you're wrong. All right. Moving on to number 3, Max the Blessed Holloway. Now you might be confused, and you might be saying, "Oh well, Bedtime MMA didn't put Max anywhere on his fucking list. How is Max this high?" Max Holloway, I truly think is one of the best strikers right now. Just reached his prime age of 32, about to be 33. But not only is he prime age, everything like that, but he is a guy that I would pick in higher weight classes just because of the way he strikes. He is the best, and this is where the top 3 spots come into play. He's the best archetype of, what was the archetype I wrote down? Give me a second here. The volume and clean striker. Everything he does has a purpose. Everything he does, he almost always outlands you in every single round, in every single fight. The only time he's ever struggled is against one man, and that's Alexander Volkanovski. Dustin Poirier, a little bit of an exception, short notice, up in weight class for a interim belt, a little bit different, and that was also 5 years ago. So I'm rating, his recent track record here. He's lost to Volk 3 times. Yes, that's his kryptonite. It's unfortunate, similar to Whittaker, but Whittaker seems to have a weakness against style, where Max Holloway, just for whatever reason, has a weakness against Volkanovski, where I don't think there's going to be a guy to chin Max Holloway anytime soon. It could be Ilya, and that's where this list might shift, but personally, I think his aura of his chin is legendary. I think his striking style he is the best volume striker in the UFC, and it's not even a question. I don't think there's a single striker that can out fucking land him in any fight. And, you could put this guy up in like 170, and I still think he would outland his opponent. So I think he's great there, and he is a perfect volume striker archetype, because when a volume striker goes against people with power, that's typically their weakness. But because Max has such a godlike chin, I think that makes him defy the odds. And a lot of the time, Justin Gaethje, who's an underdog, Arnold Allen, I think it was close to a pick'em. So he's kind of slept on because he loses to Volk. And I think people forget, man, this guy is the best in his class, without a doubt. If we're talking striking, blows featherweight out of the water. If we're talking volume striking, blows every volume striker in the water. It's not even a question. And he's a gamer. He loves to fight pretty much any weight class. Fights DC. I'm expecting that to be on UFC 400. DC versus Max Holloway, obviously. But I do think Max Holloway has really high levels in every sort of archetype you need for striking, and he's capped out his level on his volume striking. It's just there is no better than Max in terms of volume striking. So that's why I put him here. I just think he's the best in his class. Moving on to number 2, Alex Poatan Pereira Shama no Shama. Now, this is probably no surprise. Alex Pereira, one of the greatest strikers of all time, right now, at least. I think Alex Pereira is by far deserving of top 3, and I even put him at number 2. 4 best strikers in the UFC. Smoked Israel Adesanya. Of course, he got smoked by Israel Adesanya, but that's kind of like the caveat of he was drained at middleweight sort of thing. And now he's at light heavyweight. He's taking punches a little bit better. He doesn't take punches the greatest, and that's kind of why I don't put him at number 1. Only because he does, out of everyone taking punches, he just takes it. Every time he gets hit, it looks like he's kind of wincing. So I think people who have great chins are able to get through Alex Pereira, but you have to have a great chin. In order to beat Alex Pereira, you have to have a great chin. You know, I don't think he's gonna lose to Khalil just because I think Khalil gets put down by a jab. Just being honest. But these are all hypotheticals, of course. I just don't think any style beats Alex other than having a godlike chin, and you need to have a decent amount of power. You basically need to be almost perfect in every single way, while having maybe slightly less than average power. And currently, there's no one at light heavyweight that does that, or even middleweight that does that. But we have, obviously, his 2 title wins. So his title win against Jamal, wait, no. Title defense against Jamal, right? And then his title defense against Yuri Prochazka too. Obviously, those are great showcases that he's just... his power's on a different level. He's knocked people down. I know he did that stupid... people fucking cope and say he did that. Well, he stepped on Jamal Hill's foot. Yeah, he knocked him down. But as soon as he knocked down Jamal, you could see Jamal was getting out of there. He was like, oh shit, you know what I mean? You've all seen the image on Twitter. Jamal could not handle that power. That was obvious. Knocked the fuck out of Yuri at the end of round 1. Could have been stopped, but wasn't. And then he knocked him out in round 2. Sick ass KO. Knocked out Yuri as well. Some people cope about that Yuri knockout. He was literally, if you watch the fight, he was out. He was on the groin, and he was literally unconscious, and he fell over. And that's the only reason why it stopped. He was out cold. And Yuri's got a really good chin, all things considered. And maybe you want to say Yuri has a bad chin. I'd argue his fight against Rakic. Rakic did everything an MMA fighter should have done against Yuri Prochazka and still lost. And somehow, Alex Pereira just has the hand of God, and he's able to put everyone asleep. He's put Sean Strickland asleep, which I know a lot of people are like, Sean Strickland's chinny, blah, blah, blah. Sean Strickland has been knocked out in the past by like a spinning fucking wheel kick. But this is different because I think Sean Strickland's chin is really good. You know, Israel Adesanya had a decent chin. He's a little older now. I know that was 2 years ago, but Israel's a little bit past his prime now. So that's why Israel's not even on this fucking list. He's shit. Bruno Silva also has a pretty good chin. I know Bruno Silva's also been knocked out since then, but that was like his debut sort of thing. Doesn't have the longest record, only being around for 2 years, but I think there's no denying he's one of the greatest strikers to not only win a belt in 85 division, then he moves up to 205, gets the belt, and he's been defending it twice. And I'm predicting a 3rd title defense just because of his aura, because of his strengths, and his weakness literally being you have to be perfect against him. And I think that's kind of the issue when fighting Alex Pereira and why he's at number 2. A lot of these fighters, a lot of these other fighters, you don't have to be perfect. You have to be a certain style. You know, Dan Hooker, you have to just be above that top level sort of rating. With Robert Whittaker, you just have to have power and be like a little technical. Alexander Volkanovski, you just have to be slightly better than Alexander Volkanovski in one way, and then you're able to beat him. Ilya Topuria, a little bit unproven, but I think Ilya doesn't do well with power strikers, so I think that's his weakness. You know, Jai Herbert dropping him is obviously the example there. Islam, also a little chinny. Peter Yan, he's only ever lost to Sean O'Malley, and Sean O'Malley's been able to basically fucking put Peter Yan in you have to grapple me situation. So he literally got forced to grapple, and his record isn't that great. And you know, I like Peter Yan, but his striking is kind of slowly aging. I think he's still top 5 though. Tom Aspinall, you have to be able to basically not necessarily be perfect, but you have to be able to have game, I think is going to be Tom Aspinall's weakness, and I think it's going to be someone who forces Tom Aspinall to fight a certain way. Max the Blessed Holloway, you pretty much have to be Volkanovski to beat him, or you have to be like the exact same style of Volkanovski. With Alex Pereira, you have to be perfect. You make one mistake, he'll knock your ass out, and I think that's what Strickland did. He got conditioned with that, I think it was a left hook, and unfortunately, he got conditioned to the point where he got his ass knocked clean out after that. And even, I think a good example is his win against Israel Adesanya. Israel Adesanya literally had to be fucking perfect the whole fight, and he wasn't. The moment he gave any leeway to Alex Pereira knocked his ass out, you know? You literally always have to be focused with Alex. That's why I have him at number 2. I just think he's that goated. You know what I mean? I think he's just, you have to, you can't beat him unless you're perfect. Now, moving on to the number 1 spot. Obviously, it has to be the South African man himself, Dricus du Plessis. Now, some people might, no, I'm joking. I can't put Dricus as top 10. He's a great all-around fighter. He's too sloppy. He's got a little bit of power, and that's about it. But Dricus, I'd give you a top 20 spot. All right, maybe top 15 if I'm being generous. But yeah, I just can't put him that high. Moving on, the actual number 1 spot, Sugar Sean O'Malley. Now, I know some people might point out the Marlon Vera situation. And I just think it's a fluke injury. I think it's the same as blowing out your ACL. I don't think it matters at all. It's just like your peroneal nerve got hit and now your leg doesn't work, you know? And I'm only counting it for him, obviously, because I don't like Israel Adesanya. So when he makes the excuse that his perennial nerve went, I don't give a fuck. I don't care. I'm only giving it to Sugar Sean. That's my opinion. I do think he's the best striker in the UFC. I think he has every single category almost perfectly done, and I think he puts on master classes. And what I mean by that is, yes, maybe he hasn't been in the UFC for the longest amount of time. Oh, actually. Wow. Really? Ultimate Fighter in 2017. Holy fuck. That's actually a lot longer than I thought. What is that, 7 years? 8 years? 8 years? No, 7 years. 7 years. Yeah. 7 years. We'll say 7 years. Jesus. Yeah. Anyways. So yeah, he's been around for a little bit. A lot longer than Ilya. Almost double Ilya's time. That's kind of why he's put up here. Quadruple Alex time. So, you know, he's been around for a solid amount of time, I think. An advocate amount of time, you know. He does have 1 loss. I don't count that. So let's technically say he's 18-0. And just pretend that 1 loss isn't there, because it literally was because of a perennial nerve injury in the fight where his leg just turned off. I, again, don't count it, and he corrected it, so I think it's just like, you know, move that loss away. In the same way that I think if Max Holloway beat Alexander Volkanovski, it at least removes 1 or 2 of those Volkanovski wins against him. You know, I think when you lose to someone and then you beat them, kind of nullifies the idea that you lost. Yeah, especially if you beat them more than once. Anyways, so yeah, reason why Sean O'Malley's so high up here at number 1. Not only does he put a masterclass on the people he should by knocking them out, Thomas Almeida, Chris Moutinho, that name that I'm terrible with names, alright? But yeah, he's knocking out the people he should knock out. You know what I mean? That's just a given. That was his getting up there. He gets the Pedro Munoz, gets the no contest is what it is. I think Pedro probably... I think Pedro might have got chinned in the last round, personally. But this is hypothetical. I'm not going to go too far into that. But let's just, like, remove this, you know? Because it doesn't really matter. It's just a no contest. The Peter Yan fight, he literally made Peter Yan resort to grappling, and he still lost. You know, and some people might still cope and say Peter Yan won that. I assure you, I thought the exact same thing you did when I watched it for the first time. But after watching it the second time under an objective lens, you know, thinking, oh, I really like when I first watched it, I really liked Peter Yan. I didn't like Sean O'Malley. Narrative has obviously changed. I like Sean O'Malley much more. I like them probably almost equal amount now, personally. But if you watch the fight again, it's almost clear that Sean O'Malley wins. You can probably give some argument, but I think it's like 90-10, where it's like Sean O'Malley won that fight for sure. And then after he beat the shit out of Peter Yan, he goes into Aljamain Sterling, and he knocks out Aljamain Sterling via my prediction. I don't think I was doing YouTube at the time, but you know, I predicted that knockout on Aljo personally. And normally, after you get like those highlight knockouts, those like defying odd knockouts, he was also underdog in all of these fights, except for Marlon Vera. Against Cheeto, this is normally when, okay, you have everything perfect. Now it's time for your boring fight, like a Leon Edwards fight, where it's like you obviously beat your opponent, but it's just boring to look at. This was not a boring fight to look at because Sean O'Malley literally did the fight perfectly. He made Chito Vera look like he doesn't even belong fighting. Like he was just some random hobo that jumped in the cage and almost got knocked out. And this is Chito. Chito doesn't get knocked out. Unfortunately, God gave him the best chin ever in all of history. But Sean O'Malley showed he had the great cardio. Showed he's got a great style for all types of fighters. Because basically, in these three, arguably, he fought the three sort of, not necessarily the categories I presented, but the three sort of, like, categories there are. You know, you have Peter Yan, dangerous, technical. You have, powerful, technical, you know, a little bit of dangerous, a little bit of game there. Aljamain Sterling, he's got the volume sort of style, and he was put away pretty fast. And then Chito Vera, who is the guy who's like, he'll wait to get his opportunity, but he never got a single opportunity on Sean O'Malley. And I think for 5 rounds, that's extremely impressive, you know? And again, this is just currently right now. I think Sean O'Malley has done enough to be number 1. I do think he's higher than Pereira. I do think he's higher than Max Holloway. And that's only because I think he's had... I think all of his stats are maxed out. I think his power is maxed out. I don't think there's someone in this division that's stronger than him at 135. I think his technique is the best in the division. I think his game is one of the best in the division. He's able to, even if you want to wrestle with him, he's able to, like, anti-grapple you. Even if you are a great grappler and you're supposed to be fearing the takedowns, he'll stuff your takedown and knock your ass out, you know? That's why I think he beats Merab. I think Merab is going to get fucking chinned in round 1. Not even joking. I think it'll be a highlight KO. But, and with a guy like Marlon Chito Vera, you have to play a perfect fight where you don't sleep on anything. Chito Vera sucks, alright? I fully admit that. He sucks. But he's good at waiting for his moment. If Chito Vera can't get a moment on you, you kind of, like, you played that fight perfectly. You know what I mean? A little bit different now with Chito Vera. I think Chito Vera just turned off his brain during the Figgy fight. I'm happy Figgy won. I would have picked Figgy to win, only because Chito Vera, I think, is going to go on a spiral now that he's actually lost and he's been proven he doesn't fucking belong. But, yeah, man. Like, just personally me, young, in prime, I think he's the best striker. I just don't think it's, like, he outclasses everyone in every single category. And the only exception is if we're talking just his weight division, outclasses every striker, not even a question. If we're talking overall UFC, the only people that I think are better, that have better categories, I think Alex Pereira just has more power. I think Max Holloway has more volume. Outside of that, I think Sean O'Malley beats them in every other category. That's just personally, like, how I think. His ground game might be slightly untested, but you could kind of say the same about Ilya. I know Ilya is promoted as a great grappler and everything, but Ilya really hasn't grappled that much, so maybe it's worn down or something. Where Sean O'Malley, you see training, everything like that. It's like you kind of have to rate them the same. So I'm interested to see where Sean O'Malley's career is. I do think he's the best striker of all time in the UFC. I think he's the best current striker in the UFC, active fighting, everything like that. And I think there's an argument to be made he's one of the best strikers of all time, especially depending where his career ends. So, personally, sorry for that voice crack. So, personally, these are my thoughts and opinions on who the top 10 strikers in the UFC are. Obviously, there's a lot I could have put at 10. I just chose Dan Hooker because I think he's the most slept on. But I could, like, if you wanted to put Gaethje here, if you wanted to put Fiziev here, if you wanted to put Dustin Poirier here, if you wanted to put Jack Della Maddalena there, Shavkat, fucking Leon, but I'm not sure how many people would do Leon. Even a Sean Strickland, I think, would be a nice honorable mention for a top 10. I just think Dan Hooker is the most slept on out of all those names, personally. Like, I don't hear anyone talk about Dan Hooker, and I think everyone who talks about Dan Hooker is kind of like fucking, give him to Paddy Pimblett, give him to this guy. I think they beat him. I just don't think they do. I think Dan Hooker is like a great style against a lot of these shitty strikers. Like, if your striking is shit, Dan Hooker will prove it to you. You know what I mean? That's how I see it. That's my personal rankings. And yeah. So everything in this video, of course, it was just my opinion, but obviously my opinion's right. So if you disagree, you're wrong. That's obviously how the internet works. But yeah, if you disagree, I am curious what your thoughts and opinions are down in the comments, you know. And if you made it to the end, this one's a little bit of a long one, but I just appreciate you for watching the full video, getting the full context, and then commenting your video saying I'm a dumb, stupid white boy who has his shirt off wearing a beanie. You know, if that's the comment you want to make, hey, I'm all for it. We can get some fucking heat in the comments section below. But yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to get through. And yeah, made it to the end. Like always, I hope you have a great day.